As Max said, this is the third year that we've had a Festival of Urbanism event in Canberra, and I really want to thank Max, your team, ACT, PIA, and also the Shine Dome this year as well, for your tremendous support and in continuing to partner with us in holding Festival of Urbanism events. It's really important to us that the National Festival of Urbanism includes an actual capstone event, I think you'll agree, in the nation's capital. I want to tell you something in scene setting, and I've only got a few minutes to scene set, but I want to tell you something about the Festival of Urbanism itself. It's become a bit of an institution in Sydney, where it was established by my predecessor about a decade ago, and it's got a mission of bringing together researchers across environmental science, architecture, design, economics, health, the arts and more, basically all of the bodies of expertise in our university and in other universities, together with industry experts like yourselves, with policymakers, with leading practitioners, community advocates, of course, political leaders, and very importantly to us, the wider public, to have evidence-informed discussions about the critical challenges that face cities and regions. And that kind of evidence-based, no-holds-barred discussion, I think, is more important now than ever. And the festival is enabled by the University of Sydney's Henry Halloran Urban and Regional Research Initiative, which, as Maxine said, I direct, and that itself is a cross-university research centre. And the independence of this university, of this research centre at the University of Sydney, means that we are able to engage with really difficult topics and explore contentious and challenging ideas through events such as the Festival of Urbanism. And today, I think we're absolutely going to have those kinds of discussions. We're going to be informed by First Nations knowledge, by experts across the built environment, natural resources, urban and regional governance, and more. And with the recent release of Australia's National Climate Risk Assessment, and of course the declaration of Australia's 2035 climate targets, however controversial they may be, you'd think that the next step for us nationally would be for our national leaders to call upon the Planning Institute of Australia and, the other people in this room, quite frankly, to ask you directly how we decarbonise the built environment, how we restore ecosystem resilience, how we de-risk housing and infrastructure, and the other fundamental changes that we know we need to make if we are to confront the challenge of climate change. You'd expect to hear our national leaders calling for ever more sustainable residential design to push industry innovation, taking every development opportunity to regenerate habitat and waterways. Instead, we hear that changes to the Building Code of Australia are to be suspended as part of a blitz on red tape in what can only be understood, I think, as a total disconnect between concerns about climate and promises to fix Australia's housing crisis, which, if any of you know my work, I'm absolutely passionate about fixing as well. And so I'm not here to defend redundant regulation, but I do think it's time to elevate national conversations in our era of polycrisis, defined by climate threat, defined by social inequality and biodiversity loss, to rethink our systems for food, energy, water, waste, transport, land and housing. And across the Festival of Urbanism discussions, we had 18 last week in Sydney. We've got another 5 or 6 to come around the country. And across those discussions, leading First Nations voices, Jonathan Jones, Coolin Gordon, Peter Cooley, and other expert speakers across our events, have explored the potential to do these things. For instance, employing art and culture to support regenerative communities, the need to see each development and actual practical models for using each new development as an opportunity to restore endogenous species and habitat, about the opportunities for radically different approaches to roads and transport, about the need for transparent and inclusive governance, particularly in the shadow of AI. I know that's on the agenda today as well, and about innovation and regional opportunities for circular economies, and so much more. So in dedicating this year's festival to regenerative urbanism, we've called for a different approach. We're asking for the kind of urbanism that sees change as an opportunity to heal, restore, renew and revitalise ecosystems, actively improving social wellbeing and justice. And I can see that the program of speakers today that's been assembled by Maxine and the team gives us the right starting point for that conversation, grounded here in this extraordinary bush capital. I don't think it's hyperbole, and I don't think I'm flattering you to say that if any Australian city region can demonstrate a model for what regenerative urbanism might look like, it's here. Thank you.
Okay, now it's my great pleasure, Nez. I don't think I really need to introduce you, but I will. Nez is our co-vice president of PIA. She's an urban planning researcher, practitioner, extremely broad experience across the public and private sectors, locally and internationally. She's passionate about inclusiveness and sustainable urban planning, and she likes to emphasise creating environments for kids creates environments for us all. She also works as the Assistant Director, Planning and Urban Policy Division in the City and Environment Directorate. And Nez is going to welcome you all and do the acknowledgement of country. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Maxine. So good morning, everyone, and welcome. My name is Nez Yazdi, and I'm the co-vice president of PRACT Division. Very excited about this year's Festival of Urbanism. Some of you may remember that last year's theme was planning the public city. I need to write because it's very difficult title. Tackling wicked problems in the nation's capital and region with a strong focus on climate change and the challenges it poses for Canberra's future. And as you know, this year, we're excited to explore the theme of regenerative urbanism, and I'm really looking forward to hearing our speakers share their insights and perspectives on this important topic. PIA is so proud to partner with the Office of the Commissioner for Sustainability and Environment and the University of Sydney to bring you today's event. On behalf of PIA, I'd like to warmly welcome you all and thank our partners, especially Maxine and Emma from the Office of Commissioner, and Nicole from the University of Sydney, and our very own Thomas Carberry from the PIACT committee that they put these events together. It was too much effort, so yeah. Before we begin, and also I would like to acknowledge that we have here today with us Shane Rattenberry, MLA, thank you, and also Joe Clay, MLA, in the room. Before we begin, let's take a moment to acknowledge country by watching this short video. I like this video.
We pay respects to country, from the dense forest to the wide open plains, from the beautiful coast to the majestic mountains, from the rugged outback to sky country. We acknowledge traditional custodians and their obligations to care for country.
We pay our respects to kin, flora and fauna, from the biggest to the smallest, from individuals to groups. All are equal They tell us about seasons and change.
We pay respects to community, the strength of our old people, the resilience of our contemporary community, and the connection that keeps culture alive.
We pay respects to culture, painting, artistic expression, dance and movement, ongoing cultural practices, storytelling and yarning as a way of passing down knowledge.
We pay respects to country as it exists everywhere, in urban, our major cities, in regional, our country towns, in remote, our secluded settlements and natural environments.
We pay respects to cultural knowledge of landscapes. We acknowledge First Nations people as the first planners. The complex order and intricate deep thought that went into our places and spaces. We encourage walking country and listening to the traditional custodians.
We offer you a moment to acknowledge the country that you are on today.
Today, we've got Minister Orr with us, and I'm totally thrilled. She's here in her capacity of Climate Change, Environment, Energy and Water Minister. Thank you. But also, too, she's a PIA member. And so that's really powerful in the planned city, the city where planning is everything. So Minister Orr is also taking us on a journey for the appointment of a government landscape architect, and that's going to be really interesting because landscape architecture brings things together. We're going to have a landscape plan in the future, providing a holistic way that Canberra can develop into the future. And as we know, landscape gives you a language that's different from just planning or environmental language. It's another language that can blend us. So huge thanks, Minister Orr, and could I please hand it over to you to open up today, and then I'll give you a go.
Hello, thank you. I wish to acknowledge the Ngunnawal people as the traditional custodians of the land which we're meeting on, and recognise any other people or families with a connection to the lands of the ACT. I wish to acknowledge and respect their continuing culture and the contribution they make to the life of this city and this region. I'd also like to acknowledge all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people here with us today. I am going to take a moment just to apologise for my stuffiness. While I very much appreciate that we are a city in a landscape and the bush capital, I appreciate our city and our landscape a little bit less at hay fever season. I would like to thank the Commissioner and PIA for putting on the event today and inviting me to speak. It's always nice to get to turn up and just talk to planners and everyone else as well, but it's always nice when someone speaks your language. So it is a privilege to be here and joining the conversation on regenerative urbanism. It's a concept that speaks directly to the challenges and the opportunities that we're facing here in the ACT. As Max said, before entering politics, I was an urban planner. I think I can still say I'm an urban planner. It never leaves you. Once you're in, you're in. And it is something that I think is fair to say it cuts across everything within what we do. And sometimes I think people try to make you, I think Max said it earlier, the person who gets to solve every problem. But there are limits to what planners can do alone. We do need to work with other people, and that's why it's so good today to see so many different professions here having input into what we do. So the topics today, I think I had a look at the program, it's quite varied and quite diverse, but that's exactly the key as to what will bring about the conversations and the input to really bring it together to see what some of the answers to this very provocative question might be. So Canberra is a city with a unique identity. It's the bush capital, it's the city within a landscape, and it's a city where our urban form has always been shaped by our landscape, by the ridgelines, the waterways, and the open spaces that define our region. But as our population continues to grow and as our climate changes, we have to ask ourselves, how do we continue to grow while protecting and restoring the very systems that sustain us? Regenerative urbanism offers a compelling answer. It's not just about minimising harm or managing impacts, it's about actively improving the health of our environment, our communities and our urban systems. It's about designing cities that give back, that regenerate ecosystems, support social equity, and build resilience in the face of uncertainty. Now, with this in mind, I am proud to be advancing the appointment of a government landscape architect, a person who, like many of those attending today, will have the ability to have a look at the immediate problems while also keeping an eye to the longer-term future and what we need to be considering. I'm also excited about the landscape plan for the ACT. This is something that we are progressing with the City Environment Directorate, and it's generated a lot of conversation as it's something that it's a function we've not had within government, and I think it's challenging many people in a really positive way in doing that initial scoping work. This will help to articulate what places and spaces we want to protect and create, and has an important role in fostering urban regeneration. I think it's also really important that it brings in that question of what does the next iteration of our landscape here in Canberra look like? Because while we're very proud to be the city in a landscape, to be the bush capital, it's very much a colonialist view, and I think there's a real opportunity to go back and have a look particularly at traditional custodians and the knowledge they bring to landscape and what they bring to country, and start to put that into our next iteration of what our city looks like far more clearly than it has been. So to support the landscape plan, this year's budget includes investments in mapping critical habitats for threatened species and priority conservation areas, and also starting to look at appointing the actual landscape architect so they can do all the work. We're also investing in a series of planning reforms that aim to embed sustainability and regeneration into the way we design and manage our city, but we know that policy alone is not enough. Regeneration requires collaboration across government, community, science and industry. It requires us to listen to First Nations knowledge, to empower local land carers and to embrace innovation while remaining mindful of the risks, including the environmental footprint of emerging technologies such as AI. Today's discussion will touch on many of these themes, and they'll challenge us to think differently about urban development, not as a linear process of expansion, but as a cyclical process of renewal. They will remind us that urban regeneration is not a distant ideal, but a practical and necessary response to the environmental and social pressures that we face. So I look forward to hearing the attendees' verdict today on the topic, whether regenerative urbanism is an aspirational goal or a realistic target. And I thank you all for inviting me along today to be part of this conversation, and I look forward to hearing everything that comes next. Thank you.
Okay, as has been said, the context is regenerative urbanism. Why are we looking at moving past sustainability? Well, the UN goals says 2030 we should achieve sustainability. 5 years' time, we're not going to do it. So there are discussions globally and locally about, okay, let's move the conversation to be around regenerative. Regenerative means focusing on the environment and adding more, not having it as part of the trade-off. So it's going to be a challenge, it's going to be complex. But one of the things that we have to do is we have to bring people together. The Minister said it, to collaborate. The artists, the scientists, the community member, the planner, everyone needs to collaborate. And therefore, in my time as in the honoured role of Commissioner, I'm going to be fostering as many collaborative discussions as I can, working with community, working with everyone. And today has been designed around all the people who I have worked in some way, in a collaborative way with. And they're grappling with really hard issues, but it's those collaborative conversations. So I'm enormously pleased that everyone is here today who is. Today's been organised in 2 sessions. First one looks at the imperatives for helping or hindering regenerative approaches. So have that in your head. The first 4 speakers are, helping or hindering, and the second 4 have been given the easy task of just tell us solutions. Come forward and tell us what are regenerative solutions. And at lunchtime, you will see people's perceptions of what are regenerative solutions. There was a photographic competition, and the competition just said, take a photograph of whatever you think is regenerative. So it's up to you to interpret. One of the things being in the capital city, I'm aware of a video made through UC that asks the question, if Marion and Walter were to come back now, what would they think of the planning of Canberra? And although it doesn't explicitly address regenerative issues, it's a delightful video. Bear with me, it's 7 minutes. We'll show the planning video, because what would Walter and Marion say? And you will notice the use of artificial AI in it. So if we could play that one, Tom, please.
Visit the following Canberra locations and evaluate them in relation to the original plans for the city. What would the Griffins think of them today? 1. The axis from Mount Ainslie to Parliament Hill. More like a short story than a planning report. How can we really know? It's not as if we can ask them.
But you can.
What the?
I've been trying to get Walt to do just what you read out. Now you've no excuse.
But how?
Never mind the how, let's get on with the what and the why. You'll have a deadline to meet.
I think I've been staying up too late doing other assignments.
Hold us up to the view, would you?
Like this?
Wow, amazing, breathtaking. It's all there, your plan.
Is it? Where's the symmetry?
The triangle, the parliament.
Not how I imagined.
The lake.
All askew, no round basin.
But it's there, and it's beautiful. Land's sakes, Walk. It's been named after you.
They should have named this place Marion's Views, not View.
More than a century, Walt. Of course there's been changes. Can you take us to the other end of the axis?
It's on the list, but the next one's also from up here. Saves more driving. But we will get there. I'm Roshani, by the way, uni student, built environment studies. Can I record this, please? Here we are. Civic.
Civic, Walt. It's called Civic. What you named it in your plans. A city center name not like any other in the world.
They kept the hexagons. Light and air, I guess. Lots of buildings, but not much architecture.
Now, Walt, you're going to see things that'll trouble you. Trouble me, too. But if you look through them, you'll also see good. Agree, Roshani?
Yes, absolutely.
Some really nice Art Deco buildings. Even some good ones from period since. Lots of place for nature. Public squares, parks, pedestrian footways. Too many automobiles, baby.
Shall we head down? That's next on the list.
They have streetcar.
Only one line, but it does go where you planned. Northbourne Avenue.
A 200-foot road reserved precisely for that purpose. But the government architect, John Smith Murdoch, how he hated it. Extravagant waste of land, he said.
But you won that one, Walt.
And they're building another one. South, back over the lake, to the Parliament precinct. Next on our list.
Not bad, like embracing arms.
Not the capital we planned for up there. This puts the politicians above the people.
Principle holds. Anyone can go up.
Hill's no place for communal celebrations.
There's
debate.
a hall for those inside this building. This forecourt, too. And for rallies and stuff, all this greensward. The people before the politicians, at least. And a vista back to Ainslie Mountain as you planned.
Except for another John Smith Murdoch felony. The temporary parliament. Temporary for 50 years. Who dare knock down a half-century of national history? Like an outhouse in this building's front yard.
I did not like it when it was new, but now it's settled. The gardens help.
Now it's a museum for democracy. Isn't democracy like a thing for you?
Not what they call democracy. Not the true kind. Spiritual. Walt Whitman wouldn't recognize.
Land's sakes, Walt, here you go again. Sure, we had some negative experiences, but as I keep saying, you really can't spend the rest of eternity bewailing them like this. You really have to start accentuating the positive.
But where do we find more of that?
The suburbs, the original ones, close in.
This is Tasmania Circle, part of Forest. Built to your plan, as I recall, just down from Parliament Hill. Some of the most sought after real estate these days.
Big, leafy blocks. Solid brick houses for the boss men, eh?
And no boss women in those days.
Except you in my life, for which I'm eternally grateful. If we'd never gotten together.
Neither of us would have thrived. Goes both ways.
Civil service Shangri-La. But what about the more junior ones at the sharp end?
They put them north side. You planned it too, and that's last on my list. They house the non-executive public servants here.
More big leafy blocks. Nearby park. Looks pretty prosperous.
Not then. It was old open sheep paddock. The houses, small, timber with iron roofs. A long way to get to work. Down through the Molonglo Valley. No lake and bridges then.
That'd be right. But now?
Like you said, big leafy blocks. Houses were extended, blocks subdivided and sold. And only 2 k's from Civic. Much more employment there now.
This park wasn't in my plan. Not exactly here.
It's here because it was a special meeting place for the local traditional custodians. There's a sign on the other side.
They got the Canberra name right here.
It's probably more complex than that. But look, thank you so much. I feel so honored that you've helped me look back at your Canberra work through your eyes.
Thank you too for being our medium.
Yes, helping me expunge some demons.
I'm really looking forward to writing my report.
Godspeed, Roshani.
Well, better get writing pronto. Oh, but how will I cite my references?
Okay, I selected that for today because, is it an aspirational goal or a realistic target? And that would have been asked back then. And planners matter, and I just wanted to reinforce that with a good plan, you'll have your debates, you'll have your hard conversations, but it can manifest in a way that's overall positive. So now to ask imperatives, helping or hindering regenerative approaches, my 2 colleagues. Could you please start to come up? They're going to host the session. Now, you've met Nez, and you've also sort of met Tom. Tom Carberry is an urban planning professional, experience in ACT, New South Wales and Victoria, senior planner with SMEC and PIA Divisional Committee, and has been a colleague on the journey of this festival for the past couple of years. Tom, over to you.
Thank you, Max. Well, it's my pleasure today to introduce our first presenter for the day, Mary Mudford. Mary is a proud Ngunnawal woman and a traditional custodian of the ACT region and is an active participant in creating change and inclusion for her community. Mary has worked in ACT and New South Wales in environmental and land management for 20 years in various roles as Aboriginal Liaison Officer, Acting Discovery Coordinator and Assistant Director. Mary has worked extensively to ensure that culturally appropriate engagement and strengthen relationships to ensure that self-determination of cultural values and aspirations inform planning, development and implementation of projects and programs to successfully improve outcomes for traditional custodians and more broadly for First Nations people. Please join me in welcoming Mary to the stage. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom, very much for the introduction and Max for the invite to present today. I've only got a short time to present today, but in speaking to Max, I chose to present today on closing the gap and why it is important to recognise that piece of work and the importance to our community as First Nations people. So closing the gap. If you haven't read Closing the Gap, I highly recommend that you take the opportunity to go to the government website and read Closing the Gap in its full form. Priority Reform Area 1 is formal partnerships and shared decision making with an outcome Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people are empowered to share decision making authority with governments to accelerate policy and place-based progress on closing the gap through formal partnership arrangements. Priority Reform 2, building the community-controlled sector. The outcome for that is building the community-controlled sector. There is a strong and sustainable Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander community-controlled sector delivering high-quality services to meet the needs of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people across the country. Priority Reform 3, transforming government organisations. The outcome for that is improving mainstream institutions, governments, their organisations and their institutions are accountable for closing the gap and are culturally safe and responsive to the needs of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, including through the services they fund. Priority Reform 4, shared access to data and information at a regional level. At the outcome, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people have access to and the capability to use locally relevant data and information to set and monitor the implementation of efforts to close the gap, their priorities and drive their own development. Why does the gap need to be closed? For over 100 years, there have been acts and policies in place that were put in place under the guise of supporting and protecting our people. But the reality is that they did not perform that function. They oppressed our communities. The map up here that you see, for every red dot and orange shape and a black dot is a reserve, a mission or a children's home throughout Australia. These were the places that our people were moved to contain us into areas so that development could happen throughout Australia. In 1912, here in the ACT, the First Nations people living here in the ACT were moved to Edgerton Mission, just between Yass and Murrum-Bateman. And there were several Aboriginal camps, and then also Edgerton didn't work very well. So the Aboriginal camps came into play, and then the Hollywood Mission on the outskirts of Yass was established, and there was also another one that was also known as Oak Hill. The gap for our people has, in the experiences that they've had, has created a lifelong transgenerational trauma that has gone down through families. Just wanted to give an example of that. One of our Ngunnawal elders, though there were many, but one of our elders was moved to the Cootamundra Girls' Home. And I just wanted to give an indication of what life was like at the homes that our children were sent to. So life at Cootamundra, the comment was they'd lock us in the morgue for talking in language for hours and hours. Another elder said, "We haven't got over it. I'm an old woman now and I was there from a young age." The impact of these places is quite dramatic to our communities, and I mentioned transgenerational trauma. The effects of the times that were spent in there by their elders has been passed down through generations. An example of that, while my mother was not removed from her family, she had a great fear of her children being removed after seeing the experiences of children being removed from Hollywood Mission, Oak Hill and the Aboriginal Blacks camps in Yass. And when I was growing up, I remember I was about 8 to 10 years old, and my mother had come into my room, "Why are you not up and getting ready for school?" And I said, "Mum, I'm sick." She said, "No, you get yourself out of that bed, you get up and you get dressed and you go to school." And she came back 5 minutes later and I was dawdling and she goes, "You need to get up and get ready and go to school." And I said, "But Mum, I'm sick, I really feel sick." And she said, "Mary, you need to get up, get dressed and go to school or the welfare will come and get you." And so she passed that trauma on to me. First Nations people, from the very beginning, from time immemorial, this was what our systems looked like. We had our law, our lineage, our customs, our practices, our sustainable living and other systems. All of that was centred around country. Country was the core focus for us as a people. Everything that we did was about the sustainability and continuation of life form on country. The reality of colonisation for First Nations people. So as you can see, there's been quite a change in the process for us as people, going from this to this. Government plays a significant role in the changes that have occurred for First Nations people, and particularly for the Ngunnawal community here. Part of those changes included the separation of our people from country, and that's what those red lines around countries mean. It's the separation of us from country. And then we started having government policies put in place that started to intersect and change and devalue our law, our lineage, our customs, our practices, our sustainable living and our systems. And from that was the development of assimilation policies that have for a long time created a space where we were not seen as equals within this landscape, within this country. Then cultural deprivation was quite significant throughout this whole process. We were not allowed to speak our language, we were not allowed to undertake our cultural practices, we were not allowed to engage with any person in our community in a way that had any cultural sentiment or content. We're also not allowed to determine what was best for us as a people. We were not allowed to be participatory in education in mainstream schools. We were part of the mission management included being told who we could play with, who we could engage with, what clothes we could wear, what food we could eat, what types of materials we could use for the development of our homes, also around the interactions of elders and young people. There was a very fine line of what we could and couldn't do within these practices. This also the creation of new systems started to break down our own systems that we had in place to support our lifestyle and the sustainability of country. Access became a great issue and is still an ongoing issue within our communities. We have to either have native title, Indigenous land use agreements, or some type of arrangement with whichever government on the lands that we are in. It's really hard sometimes when we're told that we are now able to participate in the life of the Canberra region, but at the same time there are still lock gates that we can't get beyond. And it creates hardship for us, and it creates a new trauma for us in having to fight for everything that we would like to do within this landscape. Health issues are a major issue for all our First Nations communities across Australia. The denial of us being able to undertake our own customs and practices, including hunting and food gathering, created a diet system for us that was not meant to be for us. The introduction of flour, salt and sugar created a major impact in our health and wellbeing on country. Our ability to undertake ceremony has also impacted our health and wellbeing. Our wellbeing is very significantly part of our spiritual connection to this country, and without access, it's really hard to undertake the necessary processes and systems that we need to undertake for our own health and wellbeing. And the last one is racism. While Canberra was really the only territory that had an outstanding vote for yes within the referendum, 65, I think it was about 65% of Canberrans voted yes. But there are still a large number of people within the landscape and across Australia who still hold the values that we are not part of this country, that we are not worthy of being recognised, that we are not worthy of being engaged with, and that we have no value to the Australian society. And that is a really difficult experience for my people to go through. Challenges. The challenges, particularly in relation to anything that we do with communities on country, but also is significant to planning. Creating a shared pathway that values and empowers both Ngunnawal and government needs and decision making. Recognising that there is the government way of doing things and there is the Ngunnawal way of being and doing for country, navigating two distinct and separate law. How does the Directorate engage, meant to take that word out. How do we engage the ACT First Nations community in the work we do that values and respects Ngunnawal country, law, and people to improve closing the gap outcomes for our community? How do we create trust and respect in our relationships that will transcend difficult challenges and opposing views and ways of being and doing? And I think that last challenge is quite significant to urban development and planning, because for too long we've been told that, it has to be this way because that's the way to do it, that we've done our research, we have all the science and all of that. But we also need to value that we had our own systems and sciences and practices that supported how we moved through the landscape, engaged in the landscape and developed in the landscape. We had agricultural systems, aquacultural systems, and it's really hard for us now to come back to those spaces and until people actually recognise that we had those in place. In closing the gap, Closing the Gap has a definition of cultural safety, and cultural safety for our communities is an utmost priority for anybody engaging with our communities. If we do not provide cultural safety to any First Nations person who is engaging within the work that you are undertaking or I am undertaking or any government agency is undertaking, we need to support the cultural safety. Cultural safety is about overcoming the power imbalances of places, people and policies that occur between the majority non-Indigenous position and the minority Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander person, so that there is no assault, challenge or denial of the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander person's identity, of who they are and what they need. So in thinking about planning and regenerative urban development, how do we ensure that First Nations voices, and in particular the Ngunnawal community's voice here in the ACT, is part of the process of future urban development? Because if we don't, it's creating that same cycle again of you are not worthy. We only need to engage with you to inform you of what we're doing rather than engaging us in the full conversation around development, particularly in the planning space. It's really important to recognise that the majority of people living in the ACT do not understand or know our ways of being and doing, our places, our historic places, our cultural heritage places. They do not know the stories that go along with those places. And it's really important for us to be able to protect both the tangible and intangible values of our culture. Thank you so much for allowing me to speak today, and I hope to talk to a few people throughout the day. Thank you so much.
Time for our second speaker for the day. It's my pleasure to invite Dr. Penelope Matthew onto the stage, or Pen. Pen is the President and Human Rights Commissioner of the ACT Human Rights Commission. She has worked on human rights throughout her career, both as an academic and as a lawyer, working in various capacities with human rights organisations, including non-governmental organisations and national human rights in Australia. She has also contributed to the work of United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees as an independent expert in refugee law. Penn has also had an extensive career in academia, and in 2008, the ACT government awarded her an International Women's Day Award for outstanding contributions to human rights and social justice. Penn is charged with providing guidance on how the new provision in the ACT Human Rights Act 2004 to a healthy environment is to be advanced. The ACT is the only jurisdiction with such a right, so this is uncharted territory. She will share the challenges and opportunities this presents and reflect on its implication for the environment and consequently regenerative urbanism. Thanks, Penn.
Thanks so much for inviting me to speak. I too would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we're meeting, and I want to particularly thank Mary for that very powerful presentation on closing the gap. Canberra, as we've said a number of times already today, is fondly known as the bush capital. Many of us love this city because of its proximity to nature, to iconic Australian animals and birds, and most of its population want it to stay that way. I suspect most of us also know that in order to retain what we have, we need to change. And that's because we now live in the age of the Anthropocene, an era in which the activities of human beings threaten our environment, unleashing natural forces that in turn threaten to overwhelm us. Regeneration, as I understand it, and I'm no expert in this area, goes beyond maintaining what we have. There's now a burgeoning literature on regenerative cities that restore the environment, giving back to the land and waters on which cities are built. As Girardet has written, cities can do this by minimising reliance on fossil fuels, restoring biodiversity, ecosystem resilience and healthy soils, countering soil erosion, reforesting watersheds and mangroves, restoring water tables and addressing water pollution, moving towards zero waste cities and countering climate change. If Canberra was a regenerative city, it would not simply be set in the bush, it would give back to the bush. My task today is to talk about the relationship between human rights and regeneration. And there's a very obvious relationship in that the ACT's Human Rights Act contains the right to a clean, healthy and sustainable environment, one of many nation firsts. While that right is very new and evolving, the UN Special Rapporteur on Human Rights and the Environment has defined it as containing 6 substantive elements and 3 procedural elements. The substantive elements are clean air, safe water and sanitation, healthy and sustainably produced food, a safe climate, non-toxic environments in which to live, work and play, and healthy ecosystems and biodiversity. The 3 procedural elements are the right to information, the right to participate in environmental decision-making, and the right to remedies and access to justice. In the ACT, the right to a healthy environment will also be informed by Aboriginal cultural rights, which are protected by the Human Rights Act. Aboriginal people have always known how to care for country so that country cares for human beings. So how then might the Human Rights Act make a difference? How might it help drive Canberra to be a regenerative city? To answer those questions, I'll give you a little tour of the Human Rights Act and I'll explain what it does and what it doesn't do. The ACT Human Rights Act is not like the United States' Bill of Rights. It neither contains a right to bear arms, nor does it give the power to the courts to strike down legislation that they find inconsistent with human rights. And that, of course, reflects the political context and source of our rights. While the American Declaration of Independence and Bill of Rights were the fruit of a revolutionary war, the ACT's Human Rights Act drew from the United Nations response to the Holocaust and operates in a polity in which democracy has traditionally been viewed as a very important protection for our rights. So the Act adopts the dialogue model in which parliamentary sovereignty is preserved. The ACT Supreme Court has the power to declare that legislation is incompatible with human rights, but it's then up to the Legislative Assembly to decide whether or not to change the legislation. In addition, rather than rely on citizens to litigate their rights, which I think we often think of as a distinctly American phenomenon too, the Act is designed to ensure that legislation is compatible with human rights when it is first adopted. All new government bills or draft legislation must be presented with a statement of compatibility by the Attorney-General. There's a process of legislative scrutiny that kicks into place well before bills are presented to the Assembly. And somewhat unusually for an independent body like the ACT Human Rights Commission, we actually have a role in commenting on Cabinet submissions. Once the bill is introduced to the Assembly, the Standing Committee on Legal Affairs will look at the bill and report on the impact on rights and liberties, including the rights in the Human Rights Act. So any new legislation impacting on the environment may now be the subject of human rights scrutiny through the new right to a healthy environment alongside other relevant human rights. And pleasingly, in the ACT, we have never seen a government introduce legislation that it believes to be inconsistent with human rights, unlike the situation in Queensland and Victoria, where they have certainly said, yes, we're going to override our own Human Rights Act. The Act also imposes obligations on public authorities, so government ministers, public servants and others fulfilling public functions like gas, electricity and water supply on behalf of the ACT to act compatibly with human rights and properly consider human rights when making decisions. So the right to a healthy environment could be relevant to a wide array of decisions involving, for example, flora and fauna conservation, biosecurity and fisheries, storage and the use of hazardous chemicals, public service fleet procurement and transport, air quality measurement, emergency and bushfire management, minimum standards for residential tenancies, planning and development, cultural heritage and Aboriginal stewardship of country, and waste management and regulation of plastics, amongst many others. Litigation concerning the right to a healthy environment is currently constrained. There's a litigation bar concerning those public authority obligations that will be reviewed come 2027-2028. It is, however, possible right now to bring a complaint to the Human Rights Commission for confidential conciliation. This complaint function with respect to human rights commenced in June 2024, and there have been around 100 human rights complaints so far, with about half a dozen involving the right to a healthy environment. I can't talk further about these complaints for obvious reasons, and in fact I don't deal with them. It's another commissioner within the Human Rights Commission. But I can draw attention to that function and direct you to have a look at our website if you want to bring an issue of concern to the Human Rights Commission. Now, in relation to regeneration, it might be questionable, I think, whether in the planning space, for example, the right to a healthy environment requires regenerative practices to be adopted. However, I do think that if a development impacts on the right to a healthy environment, and I think most developments will do so, and there are regenerative options that could lessen or have a net positive impact on the environment, then a rights-respecting approach to planning would certainly suggest that regenerative options should be taken. While most human rights can be limited in order to achieve public goals, including other rights like the right to housing, which recently passed in the Legislative Assembly and will come into force on 1 January 2027, a basic rule of thumb contained in Section 28 of the Human Rights Act is that consideration be given to any less restrictive means reasonably available to achieve the purpose the limitation seeks to achieve. And while we're talking about housing, I want to congratulate all the MLAs in the room. It was actually, as I understand it, a unanimous decision to adopt the new right to housing and was cause for much celebration at the Human Rights Commission. Now, I hasten to add I'm not an expert on the new Planning Act. We're going to hear from someone who is later on in the day, much is going to depend on the particular legislative provisions and powers in play in any given scenario. I'm not offering you legal advice, but a general statement of what a human rights-based approach to planning would require. And I think it's important to talk about that kind of approach, not just when has a violation of an individual's rights occurred. All rights carry obligations, not just to refrain from violating them, but to protect and fulfil them. So this strongly suggests, I think, that the ACT government should think about Canberra as a regenerative city, one that moves towards restoring and enhancing the environment. The ACT has some building blocks in place, and I want to commend government for taking those steps so far. They include the achievement of 100% renewable electricity supply. There are also some documents that I think point in the right direction but are not yet fully realised, like the local food strategy and the active transport plan. Other projects, as we know, like the Sullivans Creek renaturalisation project, have been dropped for the time being because of cost at a time when the ACT budget is under strain. To contribute to the effort to secure a right to a healthy environment, the Human Rights Commission is currently developing terms of reference for a review. Under Section 41 of the Human Rights Act, we're able to review the operation of laws and institutions operating under them on human rights. And I would like to welcome your thoughts on what the Commission should focus on, and including your thoughts on how we might incorporate regenerative practices as part of that review. And I think I'll end there.
So, I now invite Karen Hutchinson to speak. Karen is the CEO of Water Trust Australia, an organisation founded by philanthropy to challenge and improve how water policy is made and implemented in Australia. Karen has a passion for leading change through people and has first-hand lived experience of water policy development and implementation. Before joining Water Trust, Karen spent 25 years in regional Australia, where she was part of the senior management team at Marion Irrigation, deputy chair of the National Irrigators Council, and a member of the Basin Community Committee, advising the Murray-Darling Basin Authority. In 2011, she was awarded the Rural Industries Research and Development Corporation Rural Woman of the Year for NSW. That was too long. And we look forward to hearing you talk about your experience.
I've got my 100-word prompt here. I'll just start with a little introduction to Water Trust Australia. We're a strange beast. We exist to help Australians work together to achieve better and fairer water outcomes. We were created by philanthropy, so we're a gift to the Australian people. In 2017, particularly the Potter Foundation and the Myer Foundation got together in the midst of some furor around the Basin Plan. It was probably about the time they were sending effigies of ministers down the river, Suzanne, and they said, surely there's a role for philanthropy in here. Surely we can do this better as a nation. They set about, in the way that they did, funding some science, some research, and looking into how we might do this better as a nation. What they came back with is we actually don't need another think tank. You've heard it already today. It's not about the policy, it's about the how. What we need to fund is an organisation that will be focused particularly on the how we can do this better as a nation to get good outcomes, enduring outcomes. The real challenges that we're all facing are policy challenges. They're not about things, they're about how we do things together. The gift of philanthropy was for 10 years and $30 million, and we're almost halfway through. I'm going to jump to the lessons that we've learnt, and I'm going to talk to you about what we already know about the challenges that we're facing in making good policies stick. You'll know a lot of these from your work as planners and your work just in community organisations. The first is quite simple. Good policy implementation needs courage. It needs people to actually stand up, especially decision makers, because to make change, you need to put your head out above the pack. You might, in your heart of hearts, know that you need to do things differently, but when there's reputational risk, when there's a manager sitting above you or a political process that could undermine you or pull it at the next election, it's really hard to stand up and to keep standing up. So not only do you need courage to stand up, you need courage to be able to continue. Making change happen is messy. It's not uncomfortable. It's very easy to slip straight back to a two-stage consultation process that lasts for 6 weeks and you write up a nice what we heard report and move on, thank you very much. It's much harder to get into the weeds and to work with people and to talk about values and judgments and trade-offs. The second lesson is that takes leadership, clearly. Leadership to show the way to others and leadership to build champions. It's important that people that choose to stand up stay standing up and bring others with them. When they do that, you get a snowball effect. You get momentum. It takes time. It takes patience, persistence, and multiple pathways. Not everybody gets to the same place at the same time. People need information differently. They need to not only know that you've heard them, they need to feel heard by you. That means that we need to work at the pace of the people that we need to work with. They're not all the same. They don't all need to be in the room at the same time, but all of the stakeholders need to be heard. Relationship takes time. You need to share knowledge, experience, and science, and you need to do that in a way that people can keep up with. You also need a process. This is the people in the process bit, putting the people into the process to get the policy. You need a process that is solid. It needs to be clear, consistent, and respectful. It needs to understand that knowledge is about respect, and knowledge is about science, and it's about evidence. But you need to translate that into a way that people can feel it, they can touch it, they can be part of it, they can challenge it, they can bring their own knowledge. So you don't end up with scientists at 5 paces. You end up with a cohort of people that understand what the information is telling them and what the real trade-offs are and how they might manage those trade-offs. You move away from that lovely marketing adage of the tell, sell, then yell to get people to understand that you've got the best policy, and you come right back to understanding what are the values and taking at first principles that we're all here because we care. No matter how diverse the views, everybody's trying to do a good job, we just don't agree on the how. And once you've started to unpack the values and you've started to unpack what the trade-offs really are and what they mean to each of the stakeholders, you can start to move forward. And that's when things can start to surprise you. I'm going to use my time today to tell you a little bit about some of the work that we know about and some of the work that we've done. I'm going to give you an example of an international example of deliberative policy making in water and how it's worked. And then I'm going to touch on some early aspirations of water trust and what we're already beginning to see. I love the quote from this one, from Darryl Fields. Using deliberative processes where you actually bring complex stakeholders together and allow them to understand information, understand trade-offs and be part of a process can bring conflict to calm. Compass Resource Management has been operating in British Columbia for about 20 years now. So it's another one of those things that there's nothing new in the world, it's just how we choose to use it and how we get the courage to bring it to a different fore. About 20 years ago, British Columbia Hydro was re-licensing 32 hydro facilities. There was huge conflict. Complex stakeholders, it's going to sound like the Murray-Darling Basin when I describe it, First Nations rights, recreational users, environmental concerns, and hydro, energy, water, and so on. They chose to take a different approach. They chose to try and do something hard across multiple stakeholders. It took them 5 years to build a process, test a process, involve people. At the end of that 5 years, all but one of those water plans, was relicensed with consensus, although consensus wasn't required. Because the decision maker is always the decision maker. What a deliberative process doesn't do is pitch an answer, it pitches a process, an informed process It gives informed advice to the decision maker to make their decisions. Even more exciting than that, all of them, all 32, came up with something they hadn't thought of before. So everybody came into the room with their own ideas and objectives and how they were going to solve the problem, and they ended with something completely different that they could all live with. 10 years later, they're all still living with them, and they're about to renegotiate those plans now. This is using a process called structured decision-making, which takes into account all of these principles of bringing complex stakeholders together, helping them understand the information, helping each other understand the trade-offs, working with the decision-makers who had agreed right from the start that they would be informed by the outputs, and then they were informed by the outputs and moved on. Lessons from home. Similar situation. Some of you will be very intimately aware of this situation. Hi, Andy, and others in the room. In Australia, we've got the Snowy Water Deed. About 20 years ago, this deed was developed to enable all montane rivers to receive some water out of the Snowy Scheme, despite the Snowy Scheme being designed to deliver water downstream. The deed was set up 20 years ago with no clause for review. It was never intended to be reviewed. In my life, in the regions and in water policy in the last 25 years, often been comment about the Snowy Water Deed and what potentially we could do differently or better, but that was in the too hard basket. It's in the too hard basket because there's 3 federal agencies, Treasury, Energy and Water, 2 states and a territory that have an interest in this, 2 deed holders and the impacted party, Snowy Hydro, and then, of course, everybody else. Recreational users, at least 5 First Nations groups that touch that river on the way down. Upstream irrigators, and downstream irrigators. It was fraught. Complex and conflicted stakeholders. Too hard, no clause for review, very easy, we do nothing. But guess what happened? In 2019, the Upper Murrumbidgee ran dry just below Canberra. People got a little bit upset. Communities mobilised. People understood the environmental impacts in a place very close to home. Due to the hard work of those people bringing political and other attention to the forgotten river, there was a political imperative to do something and a commitment made to a particular senator to do something, which led to an agreement that something would be done that was really hard and nobody actually knew what they might do. That's when Water Trust got involved. Knowing what had happened in British Columbia, seeing those similarities, we brought a process to the table for government to consider. We said, hey, there's a way that you can do this. It's hard, it's going to take time, and you need to involve the stakeholders. Because of that gift of philanthropy, being fully funded, separate from government interests, separate from advocacy interests, not pushing a particular outcome, providing an opportunity for a process, we got a little spark of interest. We wormed our way in. We moved a little bit further. We said, how about we show you what this might look like? We'll bring over these people that have done it before and you can hear. We built some interest. They came, they heard. No cost to government, no cost to reputation, no risk, nothing to sign up to. Enough interest to do a follow-up workshop. How about we show you what's under the hood? My colleague's favourite term. We've seen the car, now let's look under the hood. We ran a decision sketch. How about we bring the stakeholders together? This takes a bit of time. We'll build an actual technical reference group that includes Snowy Hydro, water planners from the states, government agencies, environmental groups, and maybe an irrigator or 2. And we'll build some scenarios, some real trade-offs that people can test under the hood. Still no risk, still no cost, still no reputation, still no agreement to do anything other than turn up. Huge success. Everybody that was there stayed for drinks after 2 days, 2 very big days. Good mark of success if people actually want to stay and keep talking to each other when they're allowed to go home. Beyond that, it had started some thinking. All of the stakeholders there could see this as a way forward. The best chance, the best opportunity to demonstrate how you can bring trade-offs to the table and come away with a solution. Everybody understood that their needs were different and they might not get everything they wanted, but they saw this as a potential way for success. That built champions, and champions in all sectors. We had champions in government, people that turned up to the workshop saying, oh, government should be doing this, and at the end of the workshop going, oh, government can't do this. There's too many government agencies here already. It's a congested space. And agencies that said, oh, this is actually not about water, this is about process. Irrigators who saw this as the best chance of being heard in an already fraught landscape. Environmental groups could see that they could be heard as part of a process. Those champions helped this lead to a commitment by the Commonwealth Government ahead of the election that a deliberative process would be followed in the review of the Snowy Deed. They released the terms of reference prior to the election and they're now in full swing of working towards what that looks like. The key change, and it's early days, it only took 18 months to get this far, and it's likely that it'll take another 18 months to go, but the key change is they're committed to a deliberative process that will include all stakeholders, a separate and parallel process for First Nations, at least 5 First Nations involved in this, and a time span of 18 months at least. It's a big win. It's a big first brave step. The challenge will be government needs to also understand how much control they need to give away and how we need to help them understand the decision maker is always the decision maker. The ability you get from using a deliberative process is to deliver an informed decision to help you make the right decision. Recently, we undertook a midterm review to test our theory of change and to make sure that this idea of a container for change, where you put everything in and shake it up and shepherd it through the end, was actually working. We've come out pretty well on the other side. Neil Byron, some of you will know, was a productivity commissioner for some years, and he was the chair of our expert panel. And in presenting this to some of our funders, he basically said, this is really important stuff, really important for Australia, and it's definitely not for the impatient or the faint-hearted. I think I'd like to close on that one. Deliberative processes are hard and they're messy, but people come to the table with good intentions and they want to be heard and they want to move to an outcome. The best policy is not the best, shiniest policy you can think up, it's the one that you can implement. If you move the dial a little bit, you get a status quo. You can move it a little bit more later. If you've got a great policy and you spend 10 years fighting about it, and every time the government changes you start again, it's not a great policy. Looking forward to the panel discussion.
Thank you everyone for your presentations, that was really insightful. The first question I wanted to start with was to yourself, Mary, and I guess anyone who wants to jump in, please do so, but someone has asked, how do you think we protect our environment and First Nations cultural rights while making more homes for people?
Oh, that's an interesting one. No, I just have the question sitting there. Thank you. I think the most important thing to remember is that we need to ensure that shared pathway is created so that there is an understanding of both ways of being and doing. If we're going to protect the environment, we need to understand the practices that have been implemented so far have been more damaging to the environment than assisting the environment. Consideration of how First Nations cultural practices can inform ways of being and doing to support the environment and to protect the environment really needs to be considered. Our voice needs to be part of every conversation around whatever happens on country because we know our places, our spaces, and we know the practices that we can bring to the table to support the ongoing health of country as well.
Thanks, Mary. Pen, did you have anything to add to that? Sorry. I guess in terms of your work on inclusivity and...
Yeah, having listened to Mary, but also to Karen about the deliberative decision-making idea, it reminded me that when the Human Rights Act was adopted, we actually had a smallish deliberative poll. So people were given a lot of information about what a Human Rights Act might be, and they indicated whether they were in favour or not. And then they came into a scenario where we had debates, you know, a kind of a yes and a no side in a public forum, and people were polled again at the end. And the dial did shift to being more in favour of a Human Rights Act at the end of that process. It strikes me that there are some very tough decisions that government have to make. Things like, where is the urban boundary going to be? How do you get the whole of the population on board with the idea of infill, for example, as a possible solution? Perhaps this deliberative decision-making offers a model. Our audit might be helpful in trying to identify some of the areas, but having a consultation process that involves people actually having the information put to them, these are the options on the table, and getting them to think about it and vote on it might be a way forward to cut through some of that difficulty, because I don't think government is in an envious position here, having to make some of these really tough calls. Yeah.
And Penny, if I can just stay with you for 2 seconds, I guess Nez and I are both probably quite interested in making sure our cities are inclusive and accessible. With your work on refugees, do you think that there's anything that cities can do to make migrants and refugees feel like they can share more equally in the benefits of having a regenerative city? Does that make sense?
Well, I mean, I suppose some of the things we could stop doing first of all are having harmful and misinformed debates about migration. We've seen quite a bit of that at the moment, and I think we all have an understanding about why that might arise. There are some very deep inequalities even in a place like Canberra, which on the outside seems, very affluent and highly educated, 60-odd% in favour of the yes vote at the referendum and so on. Those inequalities in tough times tend to feed scapegoating, and I think, unfortunately, in this country we've seen migrants and refugees scapegoated when actually the story about immigration in Australia is that it's done some very wonderful things. We've mentioned snowy hydro. Who built that? It was a whole lot of migrants. So there are some things we have to stop doing, which is difficult because the minute you lecture people or tell them they're racist, people's backs go up and they don't react well. I guess the second point is just to link up with this idea of deliberative decision-making to ensure that all voices are included at the table, to ensure that you present the information in a way that everyone can engage with it is really important.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah. Thank you. Nez, I'll pass to you.
I have a question for Medina. These days we have lots of news and articles about implementing AI in urban planning and in terms of efficiency in planning approvals and just, efficiency in the processes of approving DAs or EPBC Act approvals recently. So how can we balance the benefits of AI in urban planning with its environmental costs that we want to avoid the rebound effect? So, yeah.
Okay, great. Look, there is, and that's the reason why on the slides I had the governance aspect. There is a way to look at balancing that. AI, artificial intelligence, is here and it will continue to be here. There's no way of escaping this if you wish. It is a pervasive technology. As we said earlier, it's really looking at the artificial intelligence tools used. In the domain you cited, it's the environmental impact tends to be a bit lower because it uses deterministic algorithm as opposed to generative artificial intelligence. However, any technology usage does come with an environmental impact, and that's for organizations to really work out what that environmental impact is, how you minimize it. And there are ways of working through that, minimizing the environmental impact and how you offset that environmental impact as well, because you would not, we do need to balance across the economy the opportunities and that increased productivity as well with the risks.
Pen, do you have anything to add regarding the human rights? And because we know when we implement AI in planning approvals and environmental approvals, what happens to the human rights? And
Sorry, I keep forgetting to press the button. It's not very hard. I should just perhaps say that, I'm not a very tech-savvy person, so perhaps I'm not the best to be commenting on it. We have not done a lot of work at the Human Rights Commission on AI and human rights. The Federal Human Rights Commissioner, Lorraine Finlay, certainly has, and so perhaps it's a matter of spruiking her work and to get people to engage with that. I must say, sometimes I am not like a human rights commissioner and I get a little bit authoritarian, and when I was hearing about how much water was used, as well as the misinformation that, the disinformation that gets spewed by AI, I wanted to just say, let's just ban it. But I don't, as I said, not really an appropriate response for a human rights commissioner at all. If it's used in the right way, perhaps it's a great way of promoting true freedom of information. Again, there are just some fundamental dilemmas there, aren't there? Yeah.
Can I just also add with that one as well that, AI for First Nations people is a great way to preserve our cultural and our knowledge, but we also have to consider how do we protect the Indigenous cultural and intellectual property of our communities and our members who are providing information, and that needs to be a critical step in that process.
Thank you so much. And a question for Karen. How do we build trust and shared ownership in decision-making processes across diverse stakeholders? Building trust is very hard. So, what do you think?
Oh, well, this is the $6 million question. Time, relationships, a good process, and you keep coming back. And you start with the premise that people are actually there because they care, and they don't agree, and they know they don't agree. But at the heart of trust is often fairness. Generally, people will feel aggrieved in some way, and it won't be the same. And once they're able to share their view of what's fair, and somebody else can share theirs, if you give them the time, they will build a relationship that will enable the basis of trust. So you need to keep coming back to that and treat people with the respect that they need. I don't know, I guess it comes back to, someone once said to me, it doesn't matter whether somebody's been heard by you, it's whether they feel heard by you. And there's a difference there. And we're very good at going, yeah, heard you, know your views, but this is the best because, and they're going, no, you actually haven't heard me. So there's the messy bit. The messy bit is the values and the fairness, the view of fairness that goes with that. And if you can bring people together and keep them coming back, they'll build their own base and they'll actually want to be part of a solution. I think we all hear about engagement fatigue. It was reframed for me recently by a researcher at the University of Canberra actually who said that it's actually not engagement fatigue, it's you're not listening to me fatigue. Yeah. When people feel that they're being heard, and this is one of the important pieces of deliberative process, it needs to be consequential. I don't just want to come and give you my information and see it go into a black box and disappear, to your point, Mary. I actually want to know what you've done with it. And it's okay if you come back to me and say, I heard you, you said this, they said this, here's the trade-offs I had to make, and we've chosen this because I can live with that. So largely trust is about enabling people to get to a point where things are fair enough and recognise that they've been heard, but they've also heard others, and that will shift the dial, as Pen said.
I also think that ensuring that anybody who's engaging, whether it's with whichever stakeholder, is being there to listen, to understand, not to respond or deflect, because that is what is constantly happening within community. There's always a response that is based around what the approach is from government or the engaging partner, or how the preferences is to deflect from the conversations.
Absolutely. The game changer for Water Trust has been, there's that trifecta where we had that gift of philanthropy that I spoke about, which was the independence. So that enables us to come into water discussions as an impartial person. But we also have knowledge. So our team have water knowledge. So you're not starting again from the beginning with some consultant having to tell them what a water sharing plan is and whatever else. And they also have knowledge of the process. So they're very committed to a process that is fair and that is transparent and that they'll bring people back to. And then the third one was connection. And that was a connection to place and a connection to people. So our team are connected to place and they're connected to others. And I guess that the nice way of saying it is convening power. You can bring people to the table that don't speak to each other because you've got the connection to place and the connection to networks and people that will enable you to get the right people that you need for the conversation that you need to have. That also builds trust.
Thank you so much.
Look, I was going to add, in the context of AI over the last 4 to 5 years, one of the biases is lack of cultural capability, if you wish, and multicultural capability in those responses. So I've been looking quite a bit into this space in addition to my background. I would say trust looks different in different cultures, and building trust looks different for those different cultures. So I think if we think about us as trying to influence an outcome in different roles or from different roles, building that cultural capability, and I think, Mary, you touched a bit on that, and multicultural capability, because we are a multicultural society here in Australia, and I would argue one of the most successful around the world, is actually critical to be able to have the tools needed to start building that trust, and it looks different for the different groups.
I was going to say, Nez and I have quite a few questions written down, but I did want to give the audience an opportunity to ask anything that they had from our presenters. So I think we have a roving mic. If anyone has a question, please go ahead.
Hopefully this is working. Yep.
Hello, Llewellyn Arundel from Climate Action Canberra. Hundreds of local species are at risk of extinction due to global warming. That global warming is being driven by the 10% of people who cause 30% of the world's emissions. We of Canberra are part of that 10%. How can regenerative urbanism help us to get closer to double the world average?
It's a fantastic question. I think the problem is I'm not sure any one of us on this panel would say we're the experts in the regenerative options. But having started to read my way into it because of needing to do this presentation, it clearly is going to offer us more in terms of reducing our emissions. And I think, as usual, the ACT will have to lead and show how it's done in order to bring the rest of the country. I mean, I looked at your face then and you might be thinking we're not doing enough, and that's probably... Yep. I think we're also trying to lead in terms of cutting them back. So having the net zero electricity supply is helpful. There's clearly more we want to do. It's something I hope to explore in the review that I'm proposing of Section 41 to try and, under Section 41 of our Act, to try and promote what the solutions are. Maybe at the end of the audit I'll have a good answer to your question, but I don't at the moment, but thank you for it.
Can I just also add, from your perspective as well, the right to a healthy environment can also participate in that conversation as well of improving outcomes. I think one of the things that we often forget about is that, and I just refer to a comment that Penny made earlier, and she was talking about the urban boundary. For Ngunnawal people, the urban landscape is just as much country and needs to be protected and valued. So creating green spaces within our urban environment is critical to reducing those emissions as well.
My answer to that one is, if you can't do it here, you're not going to get to do it anywhere, I don't think. And I think you've got the conditions. I was really struck by the rights of the environment that you spoke about, Pen, and I wrote down particularly the right to information, the right to participation, and the right to remedy, to access to justice. Yes. Is that right? Yeah, so again, if you can start testing those things and testing them publicly in the nation's capital, this is where you start to build champions that are outside, that'll go, well, they can do it there. How hard can it actually be? So you're paving a new way. Don't lose heart. I was reminded the other day that, everyone overestimates what you can do in a year and underestimates what you can do in 10. You've got another 9. You'll be right.
G'day. My question is about how do you increase the effectiveness to be heard and things to be actually done? I don't live in Canberra, but people close to me do, and I heard in 2012, 2013, 2014 about this African love grass, and it's coming, it's coming. And then people close to me were writing to politicians saying we have to do something about this. And I think that's pretty much ignored. And then advice was given, you've got to wash your lawnmowers. As there was government employees going around lawn mowing, they were cutting the African love grass and they were just taking their lawnmower someplace else, and they were spreading the seeds. And so many letters were sent, it was on the radio. As I said, people close to me were doing everything they could to be heard. And now you've got African love grass around Parliament House. You've got it in front of the Prime Minister's house, and it's spread through the suburbs. And now I think something's being done, but it's a bit late. And I would arrive in Canberra, stay for a while, then I'm gone again. I said, surely something's going to be done. Surely that's very reasonable, just wash your lawnmowers. But it wasn't done. So how do we increase the effectiveness to be heard and for there to be accountability when things are ignored that are so simple, that could have done something about this thing that grows so much faster, burns so much hotter, is a monoculture, and it's a tragedy, and it's spread throughout Canberra.
Yeah, I guess none of us are probably experts in African love grass, but maybe more so in the context of, I think your question was more how can you communicate? Yeah. Yeah, so perhaps more about community.
I would encourage people to come to the Commission with complaints about violations of the right to a healthy environment, and let us see what we can do about it. I throw that out there because it's another way of being heard, and we do get agencies to come to the table and try and find a conciliated result. So it doesn't have to be a big name and shame exercise, but now that we've got that, I encourage people to use it.
Look, I was going to add, I think all governments in Australia have moved towards more participatory governance and engaging with the community and listening to the voice of the community in a meaningful way. There are pilots and trials underway to do that. So what I would say is don't lose hope. We in the ACT government are ahead, and we do have different consultation mechanisms, including Your Voice panel, which some of you might be aware of it. If you are not, I strongly encourage you to sign up as a panel member for the Your Voice Citizen Community Panel as well, and there's regular mechanisms that we engage with the community. But it is a spectrum, and it is a journey from thinking, way back that we or governments have all of the answers in Australia to actually bringing in the perspectives of the people, all the way to, you might have heard of citizen assemblies and so on. That would be one of the most out there in terms of bringing the views of the community in. We've had a few trials in Australia, not necessarily successful, but we are looking at what's happening overseas, and there were in terms of climate, in particular in climate action, there was a really successful citizen assembly, citizen panel run in France, I think around 2020, 2021. So we've got good examples to look at how we bring those voices in. But it is a journey and it's a capability uplift in this space for governments in Australia.
If I can also just add, for First Nations people, we're the experts in not being listened to. We've had our voices over the last, I will say 70 years. I was at an event at Parliament House, and Pat Turner spoke at that. And one of the conversations she put on the table was, my mother stood here 50 years ago having a conversation about what is important for First Nations people, and that we need our issues dealt with. And then somebody else came along another 10 years later, another 20 years later, and now Pat's standing there where her mother was 50 years talking about the same issues. So I hear you and understand that there are some issues that are not taken in the way that they should be. And for me, it's persistence. Being persistent in your conversation, but also understanding what the issue is and how to present that issue, and then also if there's any possible solutions that can be brought to the table as well. But also educating other people in the issue and getting their voices to support yours is just as important as well.
So separately to the advocacy approach, I think that just really reinforces for me that tell, sell, yell doesn't actually work. If people have decided it's either not an issue or it's not an issue for them, the louder you get doesn't necessarily mean the more they'll hear. Yeah. So I guess I would challenge it. The citizens' juries are an approach to bring lots of information to a broad range of people and involve them in the decision making. But the other thing that tends to come into play there, what's the consequence? And how do I understand that consequence for me? So you made the point that just washed your lawnmower, how hard could it be? Well, why weren't people washing their lawnmowers? The question's probably not why didn't they? It's like what got in the way? What was the deadlock? What was the road? Why was it so hard? Was it a drought? Was there no water? Did they not understand? Where was the understanding? Did they not understand the consequence? Was the consequence for somebody else, not for them? So it's not just enough to have the right policy. I've just spent 25 years in an irrigation district. You think you keep fruit fly out? Well, we did for quite a lot of years, and now we've lost it completely. Same thing. All you got to do is dump your fruit at the gate. It's not hard. But apparently it is. So something else gets in the way. It's usually self-interest or ignorance. But telling people and telling them louder doesn't necessarily make the change. You need to look at what's getting in the way, what's in it for them, and how do you switch to that.
Got a question up here.
Thank you all for your very informative presentations. And you've pretty well, in a way, you've answered probably the way I'm asking this question. By the way, I thought I'd mention, I think for me a big issue, there's a lot of listening happening and there's more listening happening. However, the hearing, I'm glad that was mentioned. Just as an example, the Citizens' Convention in France, I'm not absolutely certain of the numbers here, I think there were 141 recommendations that came from that, and a tiny handful have been sort of addressed. That's a big problem. And for me, part of the issue, everything you said, I totally agree with, but I think we need to say it, and it exists in just about all countries, anywhere where there are people with power, in fact. And Australia seems to have a rather bad dose of it. What I see as the elephant in the room is the culture of secrecy. And this country, it's well known when you compare to other so-called democracies, there is this culture of secrecy. And how do you address that? Deliberative processes are a really good approach. I totally agree with what you said there. And how do we get that openness? How do we get the transparency when there is this culture of secrecy? It's the way the system functions at many levels, from federal down to local, etc. How do we address this? I'm asking a hard question here, but I'd like your opinion. Thank you.
Hard question. I think it's layers. And I think what I mean by that is you can start at the decision makers and say we want to change how decisions are made. We want policy makers to consider deliberative processes and do things. And they might say, oh, that's a really good idea, but who's going to implement that? That's the next tier down. Unless the next tier down understand the value of it for them, because it's really easy to do a 2-stage, 6-week consultation process and do your lessons learned. It's very hard to continue to engage in the community that you live in on the ground and keep coming back even when people get upset and do other things. But if you can get the buy-in at that level, where people can see that actually if there's a checklist or rules or something that can guide you through fairness principles and what to actually do with the angry mob and the community in a way that will move us forward, it relieves some of the risk for an implementer of government decisions. And for me, that third layer then is community. And some of the work that we've done actually started with the Australian Water Partnership's work on community voices. And it recognised that the knowledge is held in the communities. They were the ones that were there for the first water sharing plan and the second water sharing plan, and they knew what happened to this lake then and right? It's the government people that tend to change, not the people on the ground. So if you can build capability or capacity or knowledge in the communities about what good process looks like, you can demand it from the ground up, as well as have decision makers being aware of it from the top down. And if all those pieces of the puzzle can align, you can get real change. So some of the work that we're doing in Water Trust now, we've been very focused on decision makers, and we're now moving to that next tranche, if you like, which is around the community and community governance structures. What are the enduring governance structures that you want for your community to be well informed about the things that impact them, so that they can demand good process and they can come into that process informed to support the decision makers whose job it is to make the decisions for the community.
Can I say something slightly controversial here too? Just to add to banning generative AI. But I also think there's an element of all citizens needing to take responsibility when it comes to the environment. And that's a really quite tough conversation to have, and everywhere you look, I think about this when I'm trying to plan the audit with my one staff member to work on this. Everywhere you look, there are these huge dilemmas. All of the questions we've been asked today just raise dilemmas. It's really hard to give a simple answer, but I think that deliberative process needs to be about us all being fully engaged in what the issues are and wanting to find out, not, for example, doing what many Australians did during the referendum, just to be even more controversial, but, if you don't know, vote no, instead of if you don't know, find out, and that needs to be our approach. We all as citizens, I think, need to take some responsibility for caring for country. We need to learn from the first peoples of the country and take that on board as a responsibility, not just as a right, as something to be demanded from decision makers. I'll end there.
Just add to that as well, just following on from Penny, the reality of the referendum, for example, was fear is the most powerful tool that has been used to divide our community. So information needs to be presented in a way that identifies the pros and cons of everything, so that fear can't be used, because there was a lot of misinformation put out about what First Nations people were asking for and what was going to happen if it became a reality that we had a voice to Parliament. And so in understanding that fear is a powerful tool, we need to take that away and provide an avenue for people to have all the correct information to be able to make that informed decision.
Can I add a couple of points to that? So I think, look, if we think about everything you've heard here, there's a lot around community education and providing the right information, but also through the right medium, so make it easy for people to engage with the information, or make it easy for people to do the right thing, so not allow the spread of weeds in their backyard or whatever that might be, and difficult for them to do the wrong thing. So that's one of the basic rules of behavioral economics apply to public policy. So that would be one of the things in terms of how we think about driving that community education. I would also add, I think, as a migrant myself, and that might resonate with you, I had this conversation when I was back in federal. For people growing up in Australia or having come as migrants before the age of 5, I think that's the definition the Australian Bureau of Statistics splits migrants before and after the age of 5 for the purpose of national statistics. So if you come here as an adult, there is not much that's provided to you in terms of biosecurity information, even in terms of cultural knowledge and understanding First Nations cultures. And there's 2 touch points, if you wish, for any migrant into Australia. And state governments do have a role to play in this space. That is the first visa you're coming on, whether that's permanent residence or a student visa or whatever that might be, and then the citizenship process. So 2 touch points that government has with a really large chunk of the population in Australia, where we're missing the opportunity to start educating our future citizens about the environment in our country, the sensitive environment, the protected species, or that need to be protected, endangered species, why, bunnies are nice, but you shouldn't be appalled when we're doing bunny culling because they're actually pests in Australia and things like that. We are missing a huge opportunity in that space. And I felt it. I was lucky that my first employer in Australia had really good education programs for their staff for these matters, but that's not the case pretty much by and large. That is absolutely not the case.
Great, I think I can feel Max waiting in the wings there, so we might wrap it up. But yeah, I just wanted to say thank you so much to everyone for sharing your knowledge today and your presentations.
Can I just have one more
Yes, of course, yep.
Just referring back to the first question that I was asked today, I think one of the most important things that I also wanted to add, not just in reference to that question, but engaging traditional custodians in the care of country is critically vital moving forward, but also understanding that we are not just stakeholders in this environment, in this landscape. We are actually rights holders. We have never ceded sovereignty, and it's really important to recognise that our voice needs to come first in any conversation, because as I said earlier in my presentation, we know our places, our stories, our values, etc., that need to be incorporated into those conversations. But I just want you to remember, we are rights holders, not just stakeholders.